Debbie Ferrer is going to lead us through a conversation about this year's short session in Salem. And we've got kind of a packed schedule. So, Debbie, take it away.
Thanks so much, Teresa. And I'm going to start right off the bat with a introduction for one of our favorite legislators, Representative Mark Gamba, who represents District 41. And we've invited him to talk a little bit about what he thinks some of the big wins and some of the big disappointments for the session were. And we've got a pretty packed schedule. So we're going to give Rep. Gamba about 10 minutes, and then we'll have time for maybe a couple of questions. And then we'll move on to Ethan Krow from ACLU, and then to the legislative team. Okay, so welcome, Mark, Representative Gamba, and thanks so much for joining us.
Of course, happy to be here. Indivisible has been a huge ally in everything I've tried to do for years now. So, the legislative session. There were some good things that happened. We passed some good things. There were a lot of things that didn't happen that we really needed to make happen. I think the folks at ACLU will talk about the whole raft of bills we passed in an attempt to rein in and balance for the behavior of the federal government. So I'm not going to touch on those. A lot of them, I'll just leave it at that. So that's in the climate world. It was largely disappointing. I don't think we actually passed anything that's going to have a significant effect there. We did not get the VPP bill passed, which this was our second run at it. I carried it last time, and Senator Neron carried it this time. We've got to get it passed because it's a critical part to not only forestalling rolling blackouts in the very near future, but reducing the cost of our energy. It's one of the best things we can do, and I can't get leadership to understand it.
Rep. Gamba, could you just briefly tell folks, I think some people probably know what VPP is, but just briefly explain what those are.
Yeah, VPP stands for virtual power plants. And the concept there is that there are a lot of things out there in the world that use energy. And you can do one of two things. You can curtail energy that's being used through interconnectedness. So let's say you've got they could turn down your thermostat or turn off your hot water heater for 2 hours, or stop charging your car. They could also, a BPP, explain a lot more about it, but it's pretty complicated, could draw energy from your car's battery, assuming it's plugged in. They could draw energy from your power wall, assuming you have one. Things like that. Basically, the idea is our system is kind of built for peak energy use, and we are running up against that pretty hard. Our transmission system is at capacity, so we can't add any more energy, not much more energy production at this point. We need new transmission. But think of it as like the Christmas Day rush at your favorite shopping center. The parking lot is completely full, so they have that huge parking lot. But most of the time, you don't need that much parking. It's kind of the same thing with a VPP. So a lot of other states, or some other states, are using it really well, and the folks that really think about energy understand that this is one of the most powerful ways that we can reduce our greenhouse gases, reduce our costs of energy, and provide the energy at peak moments when we need it. Again, happy to dig into that deeper if somebody needs. So we didn't get the polluters pay bill passed again. So basically very little to nothing on climate. Housing, we did some things that I think are going to make a difference. We made it, and people feel differently about this, but We made it easier for cities to have a one-time UGB expansion in certain parameters, and those parameters involve housing and they involve some affordable housing. A significant portion of that land be used for affordable housing, and they have to qualify under a variety of reasons. We kept the basketball team here. I wish I could see faces here instead of seeing mine, because I'm curious about people's reactions to some of these bills. The farm stand bill was poorly written. It was solving for a problem that the agency created, and the powerful lobbyists took that opportunity to make it something that it should not be, that will actually, in my view, damage real farmers trying to do real farming. It didn't need to go as far as it went to allow everybody's favorite, corn maze or pumpkin thing to happen. It went way, 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 way past that. And there's a lot of serious farmers that are very upset by that bill. We passed a necessary change in the schedule on campaign finance reform. However, in that process, we also basically reneged on the negotiations. If you'll recall, 2 years ago or a year ago when we did that, no, it was 2 years ago when we did that bill the first time, there was kind of a three-party negotiation between the good government's folks, labor, and business. When they wrote the bill this year that was technically supposed to just give the Secretary of State a little more time and a little bit of money to do what they needed to do, they changed some of the actual outcomes. So I ended up voting against that bill. It passed nonetheless. We are going to have to come back, and we're going to have to be loud about it to get it fixed to where it's more effective. And to that point, I don't know if Indivisible has this on their radar, but a Robert Reich concept is actually starting to make its way through several state legislatures. Montana looked to be the first. I don't know what happened. I lost track. But there's a way we think we can defeat Citizens United at the state level. So look into that, see if you can find it, and if you can't, I will walk you through that. I think that's the next big thing we try and do on campaign finance in this state, and we might have to do it as a ballot measure. Speaking of ballot measures, I just want to say this because I'm in front of all you, and I know you care about this. There is going to be on the ballot measure, I'm pretty sure, we're going to have to gather a lot of signatures, but an effort to create a wealth tax. It's an Elizabeth Warren-style wealth tax. Jonathan Tassini, who used to be a surrogate for Bernie Sanders, is the chief petitioner on that. So if you need to be connected to that effort, let me know. He's going to try and get that on the ballot by November. Any case, other things we did. Sorry, it's all a giant blur, and mostly I was angry most of the time. So,
can you maybe think about what was your favorite moment when something passed? Was there a favorite moment when something passed?
Yes, there were two. The 1.5% or 1.25%, whatever the hell it was, for wildlife. That's a very big deal because you may not know this, but in this state, up until now, the only work that Fish and Wildlife was allowed to do was on bait and bullet species. In other words, things that you hunt or fish for. They were not allowed ever to work on any other species because there was no money for it. This is left over from when this state was being run by libertarians. There's a lot of that in state government, you should know. But this finally it was a bed tax, so the tourists will be paying it, or you if you go to the coast and get a hotel room. and it's a little bit of money. It's split up like 4 different ways, I think, all of which are super important. And that was a big deal. So that was very exciting because it was a long time in coming.
And we have a comment here from somebody that your kicker reform bill was brilliant, and COIN endorsed it, by the way, and we were all sad that it went nowhere. Do you foresee maybe introducing that again next session?
I will bring it back. Here's what we're up against. And maybe it's because it's an election year, and so it had an even harder time. It is a bill that will absolutely be challenged in court. And when the chair of the Revenue Committee asked for a legal opinion from LC, from the drafters, they said it will be challenged in court and has a good possibility of losing in court. But they're basing that all on basically mind reading the Supreme Court and on a lot of assumptions. They're not basing it on the legal language. The actual language itself, I believe, is going to hold up. But because of that, leadership backed off at the last minute. We had the votes. They will tell you we didn't. And I suppose if the revenue chair changed her mind after that letter, then maybe we didn't have the votes. But up until she got that letter, we had the votes to pass it through the House, and I'm pretty sure we had them in the Senate as well. So it will be on my list of potential bills to bring back next year. This will be the 3rd year that I brought it. This legislature is timid. I'll call it that, because any other word I'd use would be very insulting. They are not willing to do hard things. They're not willing to do bold things. They're not willing to do things that Republicans could write nasty ads about and be quasi-accurate. So we're failing on so many levels.
I want to say thank you for your honesty and your frankness with us about that, because we've been saying the same things in our legislative team meetings, and so we really appreciate we really appreciate the work you do, and we always appreciate the honesty that you bring to the discussions when we have you here. So we would just like to say thank you for your hard work, and we're sorry for the disappointments. They were ours as well. And we can really see your frustration now. As frustrated as we were, it must have been even more frustrating for you. So thank you for being a champion for all the right causes. Okay. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to another champion of some good causes, Ethan Krow from the ACLU of Oregon.
Hello. Thank you all so much for having me. As the representative mentioned, there is a lot of action that the legislature took in response to the federal government that I'm excited to discuss today. A number of the bills that were discussed in the last meeting of yours that I attended did pass into law. That includes House Bill 4088, which is the Strengthening Patient and Provider Privacy Act, sometimes colloquially referred to as SHIELD law, which provides additional protections for patients and providers of critical services that are legal here in Oregon from persecution from other states or the federal government, which tragically is not at all a hypothetical we found in 2026. So that passed into law. Additionally, House Bill 4138, the Law Enforcement Accountability and Visibility Act, LEVA, also passed into law. That was colloquially referred to often as the anti-masking bill, which actually included a bit more than that, some other critical firewalls between our law enforcement here in Oregon, cooperating with ICE and an increasingly lawless federal law enforcement body. I just came from late this afternoon a hearing at Portland City Hall where the city of Portland is considering its own additional measures on top of LEVA, and everyone was talking about the importance of the fact that we passed LEVA this year. House Bill 4114, Protect Your Door, which I was really moved, Representative Gamba, by your testimony on behalf of that bill, where you relayed the story of what happened to your constituent in the hearing. House Bill 4114 is a critical bill as ICE is asserting their right to use administrative warrants to force their way into private homes. House Bill 4114 is a critical way to hold these federal law enforcement officials accountable as they violate these rights. Additionally, House Bill 4079, safeguarding students, put in place some additional guidelines for school districts as ICE has increasingly been around school facilities. House Bill 4111, an anti-discrimination bill to ensure that if someone is involved in protecting their rights in court in a way that has no bearing on their immigration status, that their immigration status is not brought up. So that can't be used against a worker who's fighting for their rights or someone who's in any way in civil courts demanding redress when they've been mistreated. Senate Bill 1587, which sought to stop data brokers from sharing the information of Oregonians, particularly around their immigration status, passed into law, as did Senate Bill 1570, which was healthcare without fear. Many folks in the Oregon Nurses Association work closely on that to ensure that there's uniform, strong standards of how hospitals do or do not allow federal law enforcement into those healthcare spaces. House Bill 4150, which would have ensured that Oregon taxpayer dollars are not used to pay vendors that are doing work with the federal government on deportations, did not pass. That work will continue in future legislative sessions. There were a few critical budget pieces that passed. Obviously, it was a difficult session to pass any sort of budget investment. But the legislature passed an additional $8 million for universal representation, ensuring that folks who need attorneys in immigration court here in Oregon can receive it. And there were protections put in place for the Healthier Oregon program to ensure that children can access healthcare here in Oregon regardless of their immigration status. And additionally, some investments in emergency assistance for refugees and immigrants, and further steps to protect SNAP benefits here in Oregon. Finally, Senate Bill 1516, which put in place regulations on automatic license plate readers, often colloquially referred to as flock cameras, because that's the most infamous company that provides that type of service, although by no means the only one, passed. That contained a lot of important improvements over the status quo. There were a couple things that were important to ACLU that we weren't able to get in that bill. There's going to be a continued work group on that bill, and we'll keep making our case for the couple key protections that we weren't able to get, but it is an important improvement over the status quo. Those were the main pieces of legislation that the ACLU tracked over the course of what was a historic session of our state legislature stepping in to take actions as the federal government increasingly has harassed our state. Any questions that folks have?
I don't see any in the chat right now, so if someone has a question for Ethan, go ahead and put it there. But in the meantime, I've got a question for you that's a little bit off topic. So COIN got all excited and involved in the initiative petition for equal rights for all. So could you diverge just a little bit and tell us why the ACLU decided to drop that initiative petition and what the plan is for that going forward?
Yeah. The full coalition, of course, made that decision, which ACLU was just one part.
Okay.
That it was critically important that measure pass strongly. The risk of a measure like that not passing, being a setback to the three issues addressed in that ballot measure, was very severe. And the coalition, including but not limited to ACLU, was unwilling to leave any one community that would have been protected by that bill behind. So it was determined that at this time, that measure wouldn't move forward to the ballot. That, of course, doesn't mean that that coalition stops its work. House Bill 4088 was just one example of the next steps we can take to protect reproductive health care and gender affirming care here in Oregon. Of course, the fight to protect marriage equality won't stop. So that measure isn't the right vehicle to ensure that we have the victories that we need on those core issues. But the ACLU and our coalition partners are never going to stop fighting for our trans communities, reproductive health care, or marriage equality, which is, of course, something that we have thanks to a court case. And now we know we can't trust the federal judiciary rather than an Oregon law.
Thank you for that. There's a question here. Didn't we have a bill to make ICE agents not wear masks? And I know
Yes,
you mentioned that one, but can you kind of clarify, because it doesn't exactly require or ban masks. So maybe clarify that a little bit.
Yes. So House Bill 4138, the Law Enforcement Accountability and Visibility Act. We had the luck to take our try legislation after several states, most famously California, had tried theirs. Excuse me. We've seen that California's law was challenged in court. And so what LEVA does is require, except for a few narrowly defined exceptions, that no law enforcement officer in Oregon can be unidentifiable. And we believe that has a much stronger chance of holding up to court challenge than one state dictating to the federal government officers what they can and cannot do. So the law was very intentionally not targeted just at ICE to increase the chances that it could hold up in court.
And I think it also requires that agencies have a plan about masks rather than simply banning masks. Is that correct?
If I'm not mistaken, yes, it does indicate law enforcement agencies creating some policies around it. But it does make very clear, in fact, giving individual citizens
Right.
A mechanism if they feel that their local law enforcement agency is not operating in accordance with the law, an opportunity for them to pursue that, to ensure that outside of, again, some narrowly defined exceptions, law enforcement officers should always be identifiable. We should always know whom is patrolling our streets and whom is claiming to be law enforcement on behalf of which body.
Okay. Thank you both. Thank you also, Ethan. And again, thank you, Representative Gamba. You are both welcome to stick around while the COIN legislative team talks about some of our favorite moments and our most disappointing moments of the session. But you're also busy people and don't feel obligated to stick around. But again, thanks to both of you for all the work that you've done. We really appreciate you.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, and I'm going to share my screen right now and start a slideshow, hopefully.
If Senator Gamba's still there, can he tell us what the second happy moment was?
Absolutely. So I don't know if this was on everybody's radar, but the only full-service hospital on the coast is running into financial trouble. They had a loan that they had taken out, and their situation was that they no longer had the reserves that loan required that they have. And so the Bank of Montreal was likely to call in that loan, which would have caused that hospital to basically reduce its capacity and its services dramatically to be similar to other rural hospitals on the coast, which is to say no maternal care, no, I think the cardiac team went away. It was really bad. And unfortunately, the best mechanism that anybody was able to come up with was to utilize I always forget what this is called, but it's like if you are owed a payment on something and they can't find you, it goes into this place in the state. So there's a pile of money sitting there that's not been claimed. It's unclaimed something or other. any case, the revenue from that, the interest payments on that, right now go into the general school fund, which is great because God knows the schools need as much as they can get. And that was literally, apparently, I was not involved in the formation of this bill, but that was literally the only place they were able to find money to be able to back this hospital so it could stay a full service hospital. And we passed that in both chambers with exactly the number of votes we needed in order to pass that. And it was very controversial, and those of us who worked to try and get it passed, I didn't work on the bill itself, but I did work on trying to get enough votes, are getting beat up for it. But in my view, it's a bigger question, and I can go into it. I'll try and do it really briefly. Nixon made it possible for, not only possible, but likely that hospitals would be for-profit entities. Before Nixon, no hospital could be a for-profit entity. That has completely upended the system that existed before that. And as a result, lots and lots and lots of rural hospitals are closing across the country. We are going to have to solve for that. In our perfect world, we get universal health care passed here in Oregon, and that solves for that. But in this moment, in my view, it was so important that we not lose the last full-service hospital on the coast due to this little bit of financial trouble. And so it felt really important.
We have an awful lot of members who live on the coast, and I know some of them are on this meeting tonight, so I'm sure that they are very thankful for your efforts.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. Well, with that, our questioner, Monica, is next up with a bill that she worked extremely, extremely hard on this session. So Monica Thomasy from Sisters, take it away.
Okay, thank you. And it was a team of us that worked on this. There are about seven of us worked hard on it in COIN. So Senator Gamba mentioned this already. It raises the state transient lodging tax to create a stable source of funding to prevent extinction of more than 300 species in Oregon, 11 key habitats. So about 20 years ago, the state Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife put together a conservation strategy. And every year since then, they've been trying to get funding for it. It's a plan on a shelf that couldn't be implemented, and they could never find a way to get funding. Representative Helms tried, and Oregon Wild tried, ODFW tried, and finally they figured out a way, which was a tax that will mostly be paid for by non-Oregon residents because it has to do with, travel. Most 2/3 of the lodging in Oregon is paid for by visitors to Oregon. So the champions were Ken Helms and Mark Owens, who's Republican. It had a lot of bipartisan support. It had many organizations signing on to a letter supporting it. Many businesses signed on because many businesses realize the consequences of losing our ecological values in Oregon, that there's an economic impact as well. There was huge opposition from the Oregon Restaurant and Lodging Association, and they had a massive campaign spreading misinformation and fear, which then had to be cleaned up by Oregon Wild and others. And particularly in Eugene and Portland, there was a lot of opposition because they apparently have their own very high taxes, and they were afraid of it getting higher. But the pressure was applied even more so the other direction, including by some of you. And thank you for everyone here who wrote and called your senators and representatives. So some legislators actually flipped their opposition to being supportive, like Senator Salmon, for example. Still, there were a few that voted no, and they will be getting a letter from us shortly expressing our disappointment and asking them to learn more about how this is really going to help Oregonians. And the next step is that there's going to be input from stakeholders on how to direct the funds. And I'm trying to figure out how that's going to work now. But I'm hoping that COIN will be recognized as a stakeholder so that our team can weigh in.
Thank you, Monica. And next we're going to go to Laura Allen, who is an indivisible member from Seaside.
Thanks, Debbie. Thank you, Ethan, for such a wonderful presentation on the immigration justice bills. You made my job very easy tonight. So I'm going to move through those. Here you can see LEBA, which Ethan talked about. It deals with the masking and some of the identification issues that people were interested in. There were several other bills he talked about, and I don't want to take up time going through those again, but you can see there were quite a few. I think the bill I want to highlight next would be HB 4127, which I looked at as a rebuke by the Democrats to the massive Medicaid cuts at the federal level this year in HR 1 and the efforts to defund Planned Parenthood. Under this bill, the Oregon Health Authority now has the authority to cover costs of reproductive health care and other preventive care that would no longer be covered by Medicaid at Planned Parenthood or other similar nonprofits. So I think that was an important statement by our legislature and the Democrats this year. The next thing I want to point out are the number of healthcare bills that were passed. And Ethan talked about the Healthcare Without Fear, which requires hospitals to come up with a plan to deal with ICE when they show up at the hospital and designate areas that they can't go in, like patients' rooms and that sort of thing. He also talked about 4088, which is the SHIELD law expansion. Those are very important. I want to focus on the vaccine availability. This bill closed a gap in our state laws that was needed to make sure that vaccines remain available from pharmacies without the need for prescriptions, and that these vaccines will be covered by insurance. You may recall last year that the Trump regime limited access to some vaccines for no good reason that anybody could find, and required some for the first time to have prescriptions. So this bill makes sure that our public health officer can issue orders to assure access to vaccines without the need for a prescription, and that they will be covered by insurance. With that, I think Cheryl's next.
Thanks, Laura. And Cheryl Conroy from Astoria. You might have to unmute yourself somewhere, Cheryl.
More successes on here, but I'm just going to focus on HB 4148. It relates to how tourist dollars are spent. Recent attempts to save older growth in state forests have resulted in less operating costs, operating funds for local governments and special districts. So legislators have chosen to offset this timber money loss and reduce the pressure to harvest more trees by reallocating some of the funds from the local transient lodging tax. This law changes how much of the lodging tax can go to promote tourism and how much goes to local governments for emergency and non-emergency services. It's now going to be a 50-50 split. It's not a tax increase, it's just a reallocation, and it had very strong bipartisan support. Next slide, please. Sometimes success is keeping bad bills from passing. These two examples have also shown up in previous sessions. The very scary part for me is that both of these bills passed out of their House committees nearly unanimously, if not unanimously, which means they had strong support. And the only reason why they didn't pass is they died in Ways and Means. I'm not going to be surprised if we see them back next session, so we're going to have to continue to keep our eyes out and renew the battle next year.
Hey, thanks, Cheryl. And I'm going to talk about a couple of other bills, and I'm from the Dalles. I'm mentioning where people are from, and I'll explain why later. Regarding the CEI hub, that ticking time bomb where hundreds of millions of gallons of fuel are stored along the Willamette River in Portland. One of our bills related to the CEI hub passed, which requires owners of the facility to carry risk bonds like insurance to pay for a cleanup should a disaster occur. But another CEI hub bill, which would have moved some of those fuels to safer and more diverse locations around the state, did not pass, unfortunately. So the coalition, which COIN is a part of, will very likely try to bring that bill back again next year. There was some good news and some bad news on some bills kind of related to land conservation. The good news, opponents, especially in the Hillsborough area, were very adamant about preventing Senate Bill 1586 from passing, and they were successful. This bill would have converted about 1,700 acres of designated rural reserve farmland to industrial use. But two other bills that we opposed did pass. One, as I think Rep. Gamba mentioned this one, that will allow very ambiguously defined farm stores and special events venues on land that is zoned exclusive farm use. We did not want that to happen. And another bill, this is the governor's prosperity bill, which will allow longer periods of property tax exemptions for a variety of industrial developments, as if they don't already have enough exemptions. But the one small victory for opponents of the governor's prosperity bill was an amendment that excludes data centers from these exemptions for 1 year while a study is conducted. And then another disappointment for me, one that I've been kind of following for a couple of years, and I think Ethan mentioned this, is that Senate Bill 1581, which would have provided school meals for all children in public schools, did not pass again for the second year in a row. More than 90% of public schools do currently offer free meals to students, but that's still a lot of kids that in some parts of the state are going hungry. So we'll keep trying again and hope that we can get this passed next year. Okay, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan Meek for one of our biggest disappointments of the session.
All right, and that is campaign finance reform. Just a little bit of background. Oregon voters enacted comprehensive campaign finance reform back in 1994. That law went into effect 30 days later and was enforced by Secretary of State Phil Keisling until it was struck down by the Oregon Supreme Court in 1997. That was a decision that we got expressly reversed by the Oregon Supreme Court in April of 2020, which placed into effect the contribution limits that had been adopted by Multnomah County voters in 2016 and Portland voters in 2018, each with nearly 90% yes votes to amend their charters. Oregon voters statewide then, by a 78% yes vote, amended the Oregon Constitution in November 2020 to specifically allow contribution limits and disclosure requirements. By now, after this long period of time with no contribution limits, the amount spent on campaigns by state and local candidates in Oregon had skyrocketed by a factor of 40 for governor elections and by a factor of 12 for other state offices, making Oregon races on a per capita basis among the most expensive in the country. We then went and started collecting signatures in 2022 on Initiative Petition 9, which would have imposed quite reasonable limits on contributions and what are called original source disclosure requirements. Under the current ORSTAR system, for example, the only thing that is ever reported is who touched the money last before it went into the campaign, which often doesn't tell you where the money actually came from. I can get into that more later if there are questions. But we had over 100,000 signatures collected by early 2024, but the business and union lobbyists went to the legislature to get them to refer a phony campaign finance reform measure to the ballot to compete with the real reform. So we compromised and produced the first limits on campaign contributions ever enacted by the Oregon legislature, and also original source reporting requirements in a bill that the Oregon legislature passed in March of 2024. But in this legislature, late in the session, a one-sentence study bill suddenly became a 95-page amendment to destroy the 2024 compromise. It was introduced by Democratic leaders of the House less than 1 day before the public hearing, where defenders of campaign finance reform were allowed a grand total of 6 minutes to testify. This massive amendment, known as House Bill 4018, was written entirely behind closed doors by lobbyists and the Democratic leadership, with all good government groups entirely stonewalled and excluded. The League of Women Voters and the Oregonian editorial board 3 times said this law was a complete betrayal of Oregon voters. Common Cause said that the legislature acted in bad faith, creating loopholes for big money, reducing transparency, and undermining enforcement. The National Campaign Legal Center, the experts on campaign finance reform, said that the bill renders the Oregon contribution limits illusory. And this slide indicates just some of the things that the bill did to the law that the legislature enacted 2 years ago. It allows anyone and any entity to multiply its allowed contribution limits simply by creating new entities. It costs $100 to create a new corporation in Oregon. Bingo, I have another increment of contribution limits. It creates a new unregulated category of political money with no limits and no disclosure requirements. It removes all penalties for making unlawful contributions for the next 4 years. It exempts nearly all independent expenditures from the original source reporting requirements, delays all reporting requirements until 2031, allows the major parties to use in state races unlimited funds from their federal committees, doubles the contributions to all multi-candidate committees, and cuts in half the allowable contributions to minor party candidates. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. The legislature went on to enact this bad bill with about 2/3 of all Democrats and 2/3 of all Republicans voting in favor of it in both the House and the Senate. But of course, not Mark Gamba. Mark Gamba voted against it. Thank you, Mark.
You're welcome.
Dan, this bill is now on the governor's desk. So do we want people to contact the governor and ask her to veto it? Is there any chance of that happening?
Well, we got a text message from the governor today saying that she's looking into it and she wants as much detail as possible about it. So she's at least holding out the possibility of a veto. If you want to send her a request for veto, you can go to the governor's website, and on the website there is a page for contacting the governor. And one of the items on that page is share your opinion, and that's where you can put in your opinion that you want her to veto HB 4018, the campaign finance destruction bill.
I see Rep. Gamba has his hand up. Go ahead, Rep. Gamba.
Yeah, just a quick thought. If I was a betting man, I would say it's highly unlikely that she will veto it, because the one thing that bill was supposed to do, that we all agreed the bill was supposed to do, they need it to do that. So because her veto will hinge on that, I will be very surprised if she's willing to veto it. This was the problem with stuffing all the things they did into what was supposed to be a very simple fix to facilitate the Secretary of State.
We can try.
Go for it.
All right. Thanks for that, Rep. Gamba, and also thanks, Dan, for all the really, really hard work you've done on that. Okay, one last legislative team member, Jeff Hammerland from Portland.
Great. Okay, well, we heard from Rep. Gamba a little bit about the climate resilient superfund bill, also known as Make Polluters Pay. And this was one of COIN's top priorities among all the environmental bills. So it was its defeat was a big disappointment. It's modeled after similar laws in New York and Vermont, and the bill would have created a new disaster fund housed in the Oregon Treasury Department, funded with millions of dollars in damages paid by a handful of companies most responsible for emitting planet-warming greenhouse gases. So what are these companies? Well, they include ExxonMobil, Chevron, and about 50 other oil, gas, and coal and cement producers. that are directly linked to about 80% of the world's global greenhouse gas emissions during the past. Now, we, COIN, we're part of the Make Polluters Pay Coalition, comprised of about 50 organizations, including all the state's major environmental organizations, what I lovingly call the big green groups, but also the environmental justice groups, green businesses, faith-based groups, and much more. And we got much further through the legislative process than we did last year. Senator Jeff Golden, the chief sponsor on the Senate side, organized one of the best hearings I have ever witnessed. However, we could not get through Joint Ways and Means during the final days of the session, even though this bill would have been a revenue generator. The good news is this coalition will be back next year, stronger and better organized. Just this afternoon, I signed up for a Make Polluters Pay Community Town Hall and organizing meeting on April 7th, so we can prepare for get our way going for the next session. With Senator Golden's pending retirement, we'll be looking for more lead sponsors in the Senate. I'm sure Senator Pham and others will be interested, and no doubt Rep. Gamba will be a major force on the House side. So now on to the next slide. Balcony solar or plug-in solar systems. Rep. Gamba also mentioned this a little bit, I think. Oh, you mentioned the virtual power plant. I'll get that to next. These systems are smaller solar panel installations that can be placed in areas surrounding a home or apartment that get best light. They can even be moved around different times of the day to track the sun. They can generate enough electricity to power smaller items in a home, maybe like a refrigerator, something like that. And they are easy to install and can reduce electric bills by about 30%, depending on the size of the system. One of the major reasons I got excited about this bill involves its energy justice aspects. It would have offered a way for renters or folks who simply can't afford thousands of dollars of upfront costs for rooftop solar to still benefit from solar power. Now, balcony solar first emerged in Europe, where it was very popular now. Oregon's bill was based on one passed in Utah last year, and 21 other states have reduced similar or considering similar bills right now. This bill would have created a blueprint for people seeking to install balcony solar at home by defining which systems the state deems safe and acceptable. Unlike rooftop solar, which mandates these agreements with utilities and connects solar systems to the broader electric grid, people who use plug-in solar will not have to sign a contract or be charged fees by the utility for doing so. So you'll not be surprised to hear that the utilities weren't very happy about this bill, but the visible opposition came from two groups, the electricians and the firefighters. The electricians want a piece of the action, of course, and they raised concerns about safety, while the firefighters were concerned about solar arrays attached to balconies limiting their access if they needed to fight a fire. Now, fortunately, both groups are interested in meeting with us to find solutions so they can withdraw their opposition when this bill comes up next session. Now, yep.
I'm going to have to move us along because we have one more speaker. Do you have a last word? We did hear about the virtual power plants bill already, so.
Well, I'm going to say that the virtual power plants bill is something that I taught for many years at Portland State University. We'll be teaching about it again this spring term. It's going to be a major game changer, as Rep. Gamba said. So I think it's going to be a very important bill, and we're going to be working on that again next session. The coalition that is working on this bill has actually approached COIN to see if we would be willing to help do a COINversation to help educate people about this bill. So that'll be exciting.
All right. Thank you, all of those members of our legislative team who participated tonight. And I'm going to drop the email for the legislative team in the chat. If any of you would like to get involved and help us follow bills and decide which bills we're going to endorse or oppose, we'd love to have you join us. And one of our members of the legislative team that we're going to turn this over to now, Alan Journay, from
Debbie, stop sharing your screen.
Oh, yep.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Yep.
Alan Journay from Southern Oregon is going to tell us a little bit about some federal legislation that's really important that needs some action right away. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much indeed, Debbie. Firstly, let me apologize for the lighting. I've actually got an incredibly bright light shining right in my face, and you can see it's not working. The second Trump term has seen a concerted attack on the nation's public lands, particularly our western forests, in an effort to generate short-term profits for the few at the expense of the many. First, we saw the roadless rule repeal, seeking to open millions of acres of the wildest and most undeveloped forests nationwide, particularly old-growth forests, to logging. Many of these acres are in the western states. A decision is expected later this year on that one. Second, we came across the inappropriately titled Fix Our Forests Act. Many people say it was the wrong F word. That's H.R. 471. It seeks to open forests to logging under the guise of addressing wildfire risk. This is still working its way back and forth through Congress, so we still have an opportunity to contact our federal legislators and urge them to oppose it, especially Pence. Now, the Trumpers are seeking to revise BLM resource management plans for western forests, particularly in western and southwestern Oregon. The goal is to increase logging massively on these forests at the expense of wildlife, watershed management, and wildfire risk. My main criticisms of this effort are three. The timber organizations always used the 1937 Oregon and California Railroad Act as justifying massive timber board feet extraction, without noting that this act also demands management for protecting watersheds and regulating stream flow. The efforts to increase logging will increase greenhouse gas emissions and, paradoxically, contribute to the very global warming that threatens the ongoing viability of many ecologically and economically important tree species in Oregon. And my third point, logging increases the outflow of critical nutrients and results in sedimentation of waterways, of course compromising the very watershed values stipulated in the O&C Act. Comments on this effort are open until March the 23rd, and they can be sent into blm.or revision scoping at blm.gov. And I will say I'm going to send Teresa Safe my notes so that she can share these links in the notes for the meeting. SOCAN testimony on these three efforts that I've mentioned can be found on the SOCAN blog at socan.eco/blog. When you get there, search respectively for roadless, HR 471, and notice of intent. A guest column on this last attack on our forests was recently published in the RV Times, and I'll include a link to that in the notes. Thanks very much indeed, Debbie. That's all I have.
Well, I just want to say a really, really warm thank you to everyone on this call who called a legislator or wrote some testimony or shared some of the information that we put out on social media. It really does make a difference because, you know, our legislators, when they hear from us, it does put pressure on them. So thank you, thank you, thank you.